Can you tell the difference between a $1,000 zoom lens like this one and a $3,000 zoom lens like that one? Well, we're about to find out because I recently shot a rugby game with each one, and I challenge you to figure out which game was shot with which lens.
We've come a long, long way together, through the hard times and the good. I have to celebrate you, baby. I have to praise you like I should.
For those who don't know, my name is E, I'm a professional sports videographer, and I'm here on YouTube to give you the tools and knowledge that you need to create your own epic sports videos. Right now, you're probably wondering why you can't see any difference between a $1,000 lens and a $3,000 one. Well, don't worry, you're not alone. I can't see much of a difference either. But there is a difference, and it's a big one, even though it wasn't noticeable in the edit you just watched. You see, sports is one of the most difficult types of videography there is. It really is, mainly because you can't control anything. You can't control the lighting conditions, you can't stop people from getting in your shot, you never know what's gonna happen next, everything is super fast-paced, and there's no do-over if you miss something. This is why the extra control provided by a high-end lens like this can often make a big difference. But is that difference really worth nearly $2,000? Well, spoiler alert, I think it is. There are very specific features on the Sony G Master that may not be obvious simply by watching my game footage, but they do make this lens way better than the Tamron lens at filming sports. So let me tell you all about those special features and why they convinced me to spend the most money I've ever spent on one lens. First of all, I want to make it clear that the Sony G Master 70-200mm f2.8 Mark II actually does produce more sharpness and more details than the Tamron. It's even sharper than the Mark I version of the same lens. But that extra sharpness and detail often goes unnoticed in sports videos like the one I showed at the start because of the amount of movement there is throughout a video like that. But if you compare two fairly still shots, you'll be able to notice the difference a bit more, even though my filming conditions at the time were not ideal. And in case you're wondering, this is not a dead pixel or anything like that, it's actually a small lens flare. And that, well, that's seagull poop. By the way, if you'd like to rock a cool hat like mine at your next gig, you can get one from my merch shelf below, as well as new and improved t-shirts and hoodies that are, believe it or not, better quality and yet cheaper than the ones I was getting from my previous supplier. Another thing I wanted to show you guys, because I know it's a question I'm gonna get a lot from people watching this video, I wanted to show you the difference between a 180mm zoom and a 200mm zoom. As you can see, the difference is not that significant, so personally, I would consider this a win for the Tamron zoom lens. When it comes to the bodies, that's when things get interesting. It's basically the point where we start separating the men from the boys, if you will. The Tamron body is pretty much as basic as it gets. It is well built, the focus and zoom rings are both very smooth, and that's about it. There are no extra buttons other than the lock, no image stabilization, and it is not weather sealed. It is moisture resistant though, whatever that means. All in all, this lens sticks to the basics, but handles those basics extremely well. The Sony G Master, on the other hand, comes with a bunch of high-tech features very useful to sports videography. First of all, it is almost 30% lighter than the Mark I version, which makes it the lightest 70-200mm lens on the market. And yes, this one is fully weather sealed. Just like on the Tamron, the zoom and focus rings are both very smooth and responsive, but the texture of those rings on the Sony lens feels much better and easier to grip. There's also a third ring on that lens, an aperture ring, that you can simply leave on auto if you prefer to set your aperture in camera. But just remember to activate the lock switch so you don't accidentally move it and change your aperture by mistake. But if you do choose to use the aperture ring, there's also a click on-off switch right here, so you can use it either in a clicking motion or a smooth motion. Speaking of switches, there's also an auto/manual focus switch. There's a full-time DMF switch, which allows you to use your focus ring even when your camera is in autofocus mode. And there's a focus limiter switch that allows you to choose between full range and infinity to 3 meters. And that last mode is very valuable for people who film sports from behind a net or a fence, because it stops the lens from focusing on anything that is less than 3 meters away from you. So in that mode, you can use your autofocus freely and not have to worry about it constantly trying to focus on the fence or the net between you and the game. Next, you have an optical steady shot switch to turn the image stabilization on and off, and there's also a switch to choose the level of intensity of that stabilization. And last but not least, you have 3 customizable focus hold buttons, a very robust lens hood, as well as an attachment for monopods and tripods, which massively improves the weight distribution. When it comes to performance, the autofocus on this lens is incredible. In fact, it is 4 times faster and 30% more accurate than the Mark I. The image stabilization is amazing, especially with all the different modes available, and the image quality, as I said before, is sharper than ever. But what I want you to take away from all these awesome features is not necessarily that they're going to make your image better, but more so that they're going to allow you to capture a greater amount of good shots. Because I would argue that my best shot with the Tamron and my best shot with the Sony would look kind of similar, but it is a lot easier for me to capture that shot with a Sony G Master lens. So therefore, I'm able to capture a lot more great shots with the Sony lens than I would with the Tamron. For example, in my rugby edit at the start of this video, I only showed you my best shots, so it all looked kind of similar. But what you didn't see is the fact that I had a lot more good footage to choose from in the game that I shot with the Sony lens than in the game that I shot with the Tamron. Because the game that I filmed with my Tamron lens had a lot more shots that were ruined by my autofocus and by my lack of stabilization. Does it mean that you can't do a great job with the Tamron? Absolutely not. I've been doing it for years. But it is more difficult, especially if you're filming handheld. So that's why I bought this Sony G Master 70-200mm f2.8 Mark II. I bought it because it allows me to easily get a lot more great shots than ever before, literally every time I film a game. My amount of great shots per game has massively improved since I started using this lens, plus between the stabilization in my lens and the stabilization in my camera, I've pretty much decided to film handheld about 98% of the time. No more tripods and monopods for me, which means that the money I'll be making from selling my tripod, my monopod, and my Tamron 70-180mm will cover more than 2/3 of the price I paid for this Sony G Master. So even though it is a very expensive lens, it does make a lot of sense financially as well. By the way, I do have a link in the description to my kit.co page where you'll find prices and specs for both lenses so you can choose which one is best for you and your wallet. But for me, between this Sony 70-200 and my new Tamron 35-150, I think I now have my new go-to lens combo for all things sports videography. If you haven't seen my video about the Tamron 35-150 f2.8, make sure you click on the thumbnail on your screen right now. Otherwise, thank you again for watching. My name is E, and as usual, I hope I earned the privilege of your time.